She held a funeral for me. A fake one. With flowers and hymns and a closed casket that contained nothing but weighted sandbags covered in white silk. She stood at the front of St. Augustine's Episcopal Church in Natchez, Mississippi, wearing a black Chanel suit and dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, and she told everyone I had died in a car accident in Montana. I was 23 years old, very much alive, and standing in a soybean field 600 miles away, completely unaware that my own mother had killed me off rather than admit the truth. The truth was simple. I had married a farmer. His name was Hollis Crane. He had calloused hands, sun-weathered skin, and a laugh that made you feel like everything was going to be okay. He didn't come from money. He didn't have a trust fund or a family name that opened doors or a summer house in the Hamptons. What he had was 340 acres of farmland in the Missouri Bootheel, a small herd of cattle, and the kind of quiet integrity that my mother's world had never valued and would never understand. I loved him. I chose him. And for that crime, my mother erased me from existence. I need to tell you about my mother because without understanding her, none of this makes sense. Cordelia Ashford Beaumont was born into what she called comfortable circumstances, which was her way of saying old money that had been dwindling for 3 generations but still carried enough social weight to matter in the small, insular world of Natchez high society. Her grandfather had been a cotton broker. Her father had been a circuit court judge. Her mother had been president of the Garden Club for 22 consecutive years. Cordelia grew up believing that reputation was everything. Not character, reputation. Not who you were, but who people believed you to be. She married my father, Randolph Beaumont, because his family had a name that complemented hers, and together they performed the role of Southern aristocracy with the precision of actors who had been rehearsing their whole lives. I was their only child, their project, their investment in the future of the Beaumont name. They sent me to the right schools. They introduced me to the right boys. They planned a life for me that involved a suitable marriage, a suitable home, and a suitable number of children who would carry on the traditions that mattered to them. What they didn't plan for was me meeting Hollis Crane at a fundraiser for rural agricultural education during my senior year at Ole Miss. Hollis wasn't supposed to be there. He was a last-minute addition to a panel discussion about sustainable farming practices, invited because the original speaker had gotten food poisoning, and someone on the organizing committee had remembered the young farmer from Missouri who had won an innovation award for his soil conservation methods. I was there because my sorority had been voluntold to help with registration. I was handing out name tags when he walked in, wearing a sports coat that didn't quite fit and boots that were clean but clearly meant for work, not fashion.
He smiled at me.
I smiled back. He asked me if I knew where the coffee was. I said I didn't, but I could help him find it. We found the coffee. We talked for 2 hours. We missed the entire panel discussion. By the time my parents found out we were dating, it was already too late. I was in love, the kind of love that rewires your brain and makes you see the world differently. The kind that makes you realize everything you thought you wanted was just a script someone else had written for you. My mother tried everything.
She cried.
She threatened. She brought up inheritance, reputation, the Beaumont name, the generations of careful planning that I was throwing away for a man who smells like dirt. Those were her exact words. He smells like dirt, Louisa. Like soil and sweat and animals. He smells like work, I said. He smells like someone who builds things instead of just talking about them. She slapped me. It was the first time she had ever hit me, and it was the last thing she ever did as my mother. I packed a bag that night, drove to Missouri, and never looked back. Hollis and I were married 3 weeks later in a courthouse ceremony with 2 witnesses, his best friend from high school and the woman who ran the diner where we had breakfast every Sunday. I wore a white cotton dress I had bought at a thrift store. He wore his good jeans and a button-down shirt that was ironed for the first time in its life. It was the happiest day of my existence. And somewhere in Mississippi, my mother started planning my funeral. I didn't find out for 5 years. That's how complete the erasure was. My mother didn't just tell people I had died, she convinced them. She created a story so detailed and believable that no one questioned it. Car accident in Montana. Icy roads. I had been driving to see a friend and lost control on a mountain pass. The body was too damaged for an open casket. The funeral was beautiful. Everyone said so. She even placed an obituary in the Natchez Democrat. I found a copy of it later, yellowed and brittle, in a box of papers my father had kept without my mother knowing. It described my life in the past tense, listed my accomplishments, graduation from Ole Miss, membership in the junior league, volunteer work with a historical society, and made no mention of Hollis or Missouri or the fact that I had walked away from everything they had built for me. The obituary ended with, Louisa is survived by her parents, Cordelia and Randolph Beaumont of Natchez. Not was survived. Is survived. Even in fake death, I was defined by my relationship to them. I found out because of a woman named Margot Thibodeau. Margot had been my roommate freshman year at Ole, Mississippi. We had stayed in touch sporadically after graduation, the occasional Christmas card, a phone call on birthdays, but life had taken us in different directions. She had moved to Chicago for a marketing job. I had moved to Missouri for a man who planted soybeans. Then, 5 years after my death, Margot's company sent her to a conference in St. Louis. She decided to visit me on her way back, looked at my address, and drove 3 hours to surprise me. I was in the garden when she pulled up. Hollis was in the barn. Our son, Thomas, was napping in his crib inside the house. I heard a car door slam and looked up to see a woman I barely recognized walking toward me with an expression I couldn't read. Louisa, she said. Her voice was shaking. Margot? Oh my God. What are you? She burst into tears. She collapsed onto her knees in my vegetable garden, sobbing so hard she couldn't speak, and I had no idea what was happening. It took 20 minutes for her to calm down enough to explain. She had gone to my funeral. She had seen my mother weeping over my casket. She had written a condolence card and sent flowers and spent months grieving a friend she thought she had lost forever. And now I was standing in front of her, very much alive, holding a trowel and wearing dirt-stained overalls, asking if she wanted some lemonade. Your mother told everyone you died, Margot said. She told everyone. There was a funeral, Louisa. A real funeral. I was there. I sat down in the dirt next to her. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel anything at all. That's what shock does. It empties you out and fills you with nothing. Hollis wanted to confront them. He wanted to drive to Natchez, walk into my mother's house, and demand an explanation. He wanted justice, accountability, some kind of reckoning for what they had done. I said no, not because I forgave them, not because I didn't care, but because I understood something Hollis didn't. My mother had done this because she couldn't bear the reality of who I had become. In her mind, I had already died the day I married him. The funeral was just a formality, a way to make the story she told herself true in the eyes of everyone who mattered. If I went back, I would be giving her what she wanted, a chance to rewrite history. She would cry, apologize, explain it away as grief-induced madness. She would absorb me back into her narrative, turn me into the prodigal daughter who had returned, and somehow, I knew this with absolute certainty, she would find a way to make me the villain for having stayed away. So, I made a decision. I decided not to correct anyone. I decided to stay dead. If my mother wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I would pretend she didn't exist either. I would build a life so far from her world that she would never be able to reach me. And I would never, ever give her the satisfaction of knowing what I had become. 20 years is a long time. Long enough to raise a family. Long enough to build something from nothing. Long enough to watch a struggling farm transform into something I never could have imagined. It started with the soil. Hollis had always been interested in regenerative agriculture, practices that restored nutrients to the land instead of depleting them. He had been experimenting with cover crops and rotational grazing since before we met, but the work was slow, the results were uncertain, and the agricultural establishment thought he was chasing a fantasy. Then climate change started making headlines. Then the Dust Bowl conditions returned to parts of Oklahoma and Texas. Then people started paying attention to the farmers who had been doing things differently, the ones whose land wasn't dying, whose yields were actually increasing while their neighbors were declining. Hollis became one of those farmers. By the time Thomas was 10, we had tripled our acreage. By the time he was 15, Hollis was consulting for agricultural programs across the Midwest. By the time he left for college, we had diversified into sustainable livestock, on-site processing, and direct-to-consumer sales that bypassed the industrial food system entirely. And then came the pivot I never expected. Hollis had a cousin named Franklin who had gone to medical school against all odds, first-generation college student, grew up on a farm, worked his way through undergrad, and managed to get into a program in Kansas City. Franklin became an orthopedic surgeon, and he and Hollis had stayed close over the years, bonding over their shared background and their different paths. One night, over dinner at our house, Franklin started talking about the broken state of rural healthcare. Hospitals closing across the Midwest. Patients driving hours for basic procedures. Communities being abandoned by a system that only valued profit. Someone should build a hospital that actually serves these communities, Franklin said. Not a for-profit chain. Something different. Hollis looked at me. I looked at him. How much would that cost?
I asked.
Franklin laughed. More than anyone around here has. We'd need investors, government grants, probably a decade of planning. What if we funded it ourselves?
Hollis said.
Franklin stopped laughing. The short version is this. We built a hospital. The long version is more complicated. It took 7 years, $12 million of our own money, another $30 million in grants and impact investments, and more bureaucratic battles than I can count. But in 2019, the Crane Regional Medical Center opened its doors in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It wasn't a vanity project. It was a fully functioning critical access hospital with specialists in orthopedics, cardiology, and, crucially, a cutting-edge surgical center that specialized in complex procedures other rural hospitals couldn't handle. Franklin ran the orthopedic department. Hollis sat on the board. I handled the administrative operations because, as it turned out, I was very good at making complicated systems work efficiently. 20 years of managing a farm, a family, and a growing business had taught me skills that translated perfectly to hospital administration. By the time we celebrated our 5th anniversary, Crane Regional had become a model for rural healthcare. We were featured in medical journals, invited to speak at conferences, and visited by researchers who wanted to understand how we had done what the experts said couldn't be done. We employed 847 people. We had performed over 12,000 surgeries. We had saved lives that would have been lost if patients had been forced to drive 3 hours to the nearest urban hospital. And through all of it, I never once told anyone in Natchez that I was alive. My mother's illness announced itself the way many illnesses do, gradually, then suddenly. She was 79 years old. She had been having back pain for months. Nothing unusual for a woman her age, everyone said. But the pain got worse, and the medication stopped working, and finally a scan revealed what no one had wanted to see. Spinal stenosis.
Severe.
A complex compression that required a specialized surgical intervention, a procedure so delicate that only a handful of hospitals in the country could perform it safely. One of those hospitals was in Boston. One was in Houston. And one was in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. Crane Regional Medical Center. The hospital my husband had founded. The hospital I ran. The hospital that bore his name on the building, right next to mine on the board of directors.
I didn't know any of this when it started.
I didn't know my mother was sick, didn't know she was searching for surgical options, didn't know her doctors were recommending our facility because of our track record with exactly this type of procedure. What I knew was that one morning my executive assistant knocked on my office door and handed me a patient referral that required my signature. "This one needs your approval," she said. "Out-of-state transfer, complex case, insurance pre-authorization. The surgeon wants to move fast." I looked at the name on the form. Cordelia Ashford Beaumont. And for the first time in 20 years, I felt her presence in my life again. I didn't tell Hollis. Not immediately. I sat in my office for 2 hours, staring at that form, feeling things I thought I had buried decades ago. Anger.
Grief.
A strange, hollow ache that I couldn't name. My mother had erased me. She had held a funeral, told everyone I was dead, and spent 20 years living in a world where I didn't exist. She had done it to protect her reputation, to maintain her position, to avoid the unbearable shame of having a daughter who married a farmer. And now she needed me. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. She needed a surgery that only a handful of places could perform, and one of those places was a hospital built by the poor man she had been so desperate to erase. She was going to walk into a building with the name Crane on the door and ask for help from the family she had disowned. She had no idea. She couldn't possibly know. To her, I had been dead for 20 years, and Crane was just a name on a hospital, a convenient coincidence, a solution to a problem that had nothing to do with the daughter she had buried in 2004. But I knew, and now I had to decide what to do with that knowledge. I approved the transfer. I need you to understand that. Whatever else happened, I approved the transfer. I signed the forms that brought my mother to our hospital, and I instructed the surgical team to treat her with the same care they would give any patient. Because that's who I am. That's who I chose to be. My mother taught me about reputation, but Hollis taught me about character. And character means doing the right thing even when no one is watching, even when the person you're helping doesn't deserve it, even when every part of you wants to walk away and let them face the consequences of their choices. I signed the form. Then I went home and told my husband everything. Hollis listened without interrupting. He sat at the kitchen table where we had shared 20 years of meals, where our son had done his homework, where we had made every major decision of our lives together, and he let me talk until I ran out of words. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What do you want to do?" he finally asked. "I don't know. Do you want to see her?" I thought about it.
Really thought about it.
"I don't know if I want to," I said. "But I think I need to." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Then we do it together." My mother arrived at Crane Regional Medical Center on a Thursday afternoon in October. I watched from the administrative wing as the transport ambulance pulled into the bay. I watched as the EMTs unloaded the stretcher and wheeled her through the automatic doors. I watched as she was transferred to a bed in the pre-surgical unit, surrounded by nurses and technicians who had no idea that the woman they were caring for was my mother. She looked old. That was my first thought. She looked old in a way I hadn't been prepared for. 20 years had passed, but in my memory, she was still the imperious woman in the Chanel suit, the mother who had slapped me for choosing love over legacy. Now she was frail, diminished, her silver hair thin, and her face creased with lines that told the story of 2 decades I hadn't witnessed. I didn't approach her. Not yet. Instead, I went to the nurse's station and pulled up her chart. I reviewed her surgical plan, her pre-op assessments, her list of medications and allergies. I checked everything twice because that's what I do, because even now I couldn't separate my duty from my feelings. And then I saw the emergency contact line. Randolph Beaumont. My father. Listed with a phone number and an address in Natchez. My father was still alive. I hadn't known that either. The surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. I had 3 days to decide whether to reveal myself, and I spent most of that time in a state of paralysis I hadn't experienced since the day Margot showed up in my garden. On Friday, I walked past my mother's room. She was asleep, her chest rising and falling in the shallow rhythm of medicated rest. I stood in the doorway for 5 minutes, watching her breathe, feeling nothing. On Saturday, her doctor, one of Franklin's protégés, a brilliant young surgeon named Dr. O'Yelleran, came to my office with an update. "Mrs. Beaumont is stable," she said. "Pre-surgical workup. Looks good. I'm confident about Monday." "Good," I said. "Thank you." Dr. O'Yelleran hesitated. "Is there something else?" I asked. "She asked about you," Dr. O'Yelleran said. "Or rather, she asked about the hospital, about the Cranes." She said the name sounded familiar, but she couldn't place it. I told her the hospital was founded by Hollis and Louisa Crane, and she got very quiet. She asked me to spell the names. My heart stopped. What did she say after that? Nothing. She just stared at the wall for a long time. Then she asked if she could see the approval form for her transfer, the one with your signature on it. I closed my eyes. Did you show her? I did. She looked at it for about 30 seconds. Then she started crying and wouldn't tell me why. I went to see her that night. It was after visiting hours. The hallway was quiet, lit only by the soft glow of the nurse's station and the emergency exit signs. I walked in my flat shoes, making no sound, feeling like a ghost haunting my own hospital. Her door was open. She was awake, propped up against pillows, staring at the ceiling with an expression I couldn't read. I stood in the doorway. "Hello, Mother," I said. "I heard I was dead." She turned her head. Her eyes, the same pale blue I saw in the mirror every morning, found mine, and I watched something break open in her face. Not surprise exactly. Recognition. The look of someone who has been waiting for a ghost to appear and finally sees it materialize. "Louisa," she whispered. "That's the name on my birth certificate," I said. "The one you put on my obituary, too, if I remember correctly." She tried to sit up straighter and winced at the pain. I wasn't. "You held a funeral for me," I said. "A real funeral, with flowers and a casket and a pastor who gave a eulogy for a person who is very much alive. You told everyone I died because you couldn't bear to tell them I married a farmer." Tears were running down her face now. She made no move to wipe them away. "You should have come back," she said. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "You should have come back and proved me wrong." "I did prove you wrong," I said. "I just didn't need you to see it." I stepped into the room and stood at the foot of her bed. "I built a life, Mother. A good life. A husband who loves me. A son who graduated from Stanford and works in renewable energy. A farm that employs 30 people and feeds thousands more. A hospital, this hospital, that saves lives every single day. I built all of that while you were pretending I was buried in a cemetery in Mississippi." She was sobbing now, her frail body shaking with the effort. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry, Louisa. I was wrong. I was so wrong." I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. In some versions, I screamed at her. In others, I walked away without a word. In a few, I forgave her, and we embraced, and everything was healed in an instant. The reality was different. The reality was that I felt very little. 20 years of building a life without her had taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. I didn't need her approval. I didn't need her acknowledgement. I didn't need her to understand what I had become because I had become it without her, in spite of her, and her opinion was no longer relevant to who I was. "I'm not here to forgive you," I said. "I'm not here to reconcile or rebuild or pretend the last 20 years didn't happen. I'm here because you're a patient in my hospital, and I believe in treating every patient with the care they deserve." She stared at me. "You signed the approval," she said. "For my surgery. You could have refused." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" I thought about how to answer. How to explain the difference between who she had raised me to be and who I had chosen to become. "Because my husband taught me something you never did," I said. "He taught me that character isn't about what you do when people are watching. It's about what you do when you could get away with doing nothing. You needed surgery. We could provide it. The rest is just noise." She was quiet for a long moment. "The farmer," she finally said. "You married the farmer. His name is Hollis. And he's not just a farmer. He's the man who built this hospital. He's the man who spent 30 years proving that you can heal the land instead of destroying it. He's the man who raised our son and held me when I cried and never once made me feel ashamed of where I came from." I paused. "He's a better person than anyone in Natchez ever gave him credit for. And so am I." The surgery was successful. Dr. O'Yellern performed it on Monday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, my mother was awake, alert, and beginning the long process of recovery. She would need physical therapy, follow-up appointments, ongoing care. She would need to stay in Missouri for at least a month. She asked to see me again on Wednesday. This time, I brought Hollis. He stood in the doorway of her room, this man she had dismissed as poor and unworthy and smelling of dirt, and he looked at her with an expression that held no anger. Just calm, patient curiosity, like a scientist observing a specimen he had heard about but never seen in person. "So, you're Cordelia," he said. My mother's eyes moved from him to me and back again. She looked like a woman who was seeing her own reflection and not recognizing it. "You built this hospital," she said. "Louisa and I built it together, with a lot of help from a lot of good people." "Why?" Hollis considered the question. "Because people were dying," he said simply. "Because the nearest hospital was 3 hours away and folks were losing family members on the drive. Because we had the resources to help and no good reason not to." "That's very admirable." "It's not admirable," Hollis said. "It's just what you do when you have the means. The admirable thing would be doing it without the means. That's what my father did and his father before him. They didn't have money, but they had community. They helped their neighbors, because that's what people do."
He looked at me.
"Your daughter learned that. Not from you, maybe. But she learned it. And she's better at it than I am." My mother was crying again. She seemed to do that a lot now, as if decades of suppressed emotion were finally finding their way to the surface. "I was wrong," she said. "About everything. I was so focused on what people would think that I forgot to ask what mattered." "Yes," I said. "You were. Can you ever forgive me?"
I thought about it. Really thought about it.
"I don't know," I said honestly. "Forgiveness isn't something I can decide right now. It's something that happens over time if it happens at all. What I can tell you is that I don't hate you. I stopped hating you a long time ago. I just let you go. I built a life where you didn't exist the same way you built a story where I didn't exist." "That seems fair," she whispered. "It's not about fair," I said. "It's about surviving. You taught me that actually. You taught me that the story you tell about yourself is the one you have to live with. I just chose to tell a different story than the one you wrote for me." My father came to Missouri 2 weeks later. He was 83 years old, frail in ways my mother wasn't, his mind beginning to show the soft edges of early dementia. He didn't fully understand where he was or why, but when he saw me, something in his face lit up. "Louisa," he said, "you're here. I knew you weren't gone. I told her. I told Cordelia you weren't gone." I held his hand and let him talk, rambling stories about my childhood, about the house in Natchez, about things that had happened and things that hadn't. He was living in a world between memory and imagination, and I let him stay there, because it seemed kinder than the truth. Before he left, he pressed something into my palm. It was a locket. Silver, tarnished, with an engraved L on the front. Inside was a photograph of me at 16, wearing a white dress at a garden party, smiling at something off camera. "I kept it," he said. "She wanted to throw everything away, but I kept this. I knew you'd come back someday." I didn't cry.
I'm not sure why.
Maybe I had run out of tears for things that happened 20 years ago. Maybe I had made peace with the past in ways I didn't fully understand. But I kept the locket. I'm wearing it now. My mother recovered fully from her surgery. She spent 3 months in Missouri, first in the hospital, then in a rehabilitation facility, then in a small apartment we rented for her near the medical center. During that time, something strange happened.
She started to change.
Not dramatically, not overnight, but slowly, incrementally, she began to see the world through different eyes. She met the people who worked at the hospital, nurses and technicians and janitors who came from backgrounds she would have dismissed in her old life. She saw the patients who came through our doors, farmers and factory workers and families who drove hours for care they couldn't get anywhere else. She saw what Hollis and I had built, and for the first time she understood why it mattered. One afternoon, about 2 months into her recovery, she asked me to take her to the farm. I drove her out there myself. It was November, the fields brown and dormant, the sky gray with approaching winter. Not the prettiest time of year. But she asked to see it, so I showed her. We walked, slowly, carefully, along the edges of the property. She looked at the barns, the equipment, the house where I had raised my son. She looked at the cemetery plot where Hollis's parents were buried, and the tree we had planted when Thomas was born, and the vegetable garden where Margot had found me 20 years ago. "It's beautiful," she said quietly. "It's home," I said. She turned to look at me. I spent my whole life believing that money and status were the only things that mattered. That reputation was worth more than truth. I was wrong about all of it. I was wrong about everything. I know. Can you teach me? She asked. Whatever you learned out here, the thing that made you happy when I thought you would be miserable, can you teach me before I die? I thought about saying no. I thought about all the years of silence, all the holidays I had missed, all the moments she had stolen from me by pretending I was dead. But I also thought about Hollis and what he would say. I thought about the hospital we had built and the principle behind it. You help people because they need help, not because they deserve it. I can try, I said. My mother moved to Missouri permanently 6 months later. She sold the house in Natchez. She donated her Chanel suits to a charity shop. She learned to wear jeans and flat shoes and sweaters that didn't cost more than most people's rent. She never fully became the person I was. She never learned to love the dirt or the animals or the long hours of physical work. But she learned to appreciate them. She learned to see value in things she had been taught to dismiss. She died 3 years later, peacefully, in the guest room of our farmhouse, with me and Hollis and Thomas at her bedside. Her obituary ran in the Natchez Democrat, a real one this time. It mentioned that she was survived by her daughter, Louisa Crane, of Cape Girardeau, Missouri. It mentioned the hospital we had built. It mentioned, briefly, the estrangement and the reconciliation, the decades of silence and the years of rebuilding. It didn't mention the fake funeral. Some truths don't need to be published. I think about her sometimes. The mother she was and the mother she became. I think about how easy it is to get trapped in a story someone else wrote for you, and how hard it is to break free. She spent 60 years of her life believing things that weren't true. She spent 3 years unlearning them. That's not a lot of time, but it's something. Hollis says everyone deserves a chance to change. I'm not sure I agree. I think some people use up their chances and don't get more. But I'm glad I gave my mother one more. Not for her sake, for mine. Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I learned that the hard way, and I almost learned it too late. Thomas brought his fiancée home last Thanksgiving. She's a marine biologist from California, smart, funny, completely unimpressed by money or status or family names. Thomas told me they met at a conference on ocean conservation, and I laughed because it was so perfectly symmetrical. My son, falling in love with a woman who works with her hands, who cares about the planet, who couldn't care less about what anyone thinks. I watched them walk around the farm together, pointing at things, laughing at inside jokes, planning a future that doesn't look anything like the one my mother planned for me. And I thought, this is the inheritance that matters. Not money. Not reputation. Not the story people tell about you when you're not in the room. The inheritance that matters is teaching your children to love freely, to work hard, to help their neighbors, and to ignore anyone who tells them they're not good enough. That's what my mother never taught me. That's what I taught myself. And now it's what I'm passing on. The hospital is still there. We expanded it twice since that first surgery. We added a children's wing and a cancer center and a residency program that trains young doctors to serve rural communities. The farm is still there too. Thomas doesn't want to run it. He's got his own path. But Hollis and I have been talking about transitioning it to a community land trust, something that will outlast us both. And I'm still here. Still alive. Still married to the man my mother tried to erase me for choosing. Some days I think about that fake funeral, about the empty casket with the weighted sandbags, about the flowers and the hymns and the lies. I think about how sure my mother was that she knew what my life should look like and how wrong she turned out to be. And I think about this. She wanted me to be dead rather than married to a farmer. But the farmer's wife built a hospital that saved her life. That's not karma. That's not revenge. That's just what happens when you stop letting other people write your story. You pick up the pen yourself, and you write something better. If your parent told everyone you were dead because they were ashamed of your choices, would you save their life 20 years later? Would you forgive them? Or would you stay dead to them forever and let them live with the consequences? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories where the truth comes back to haunt the people who tried to bury it, hit subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.